I saw my husband throw a box into the river, and inside, I discovered the $250,000 truth he'd hidden from me for 15 years. Today, I thought I was out of tears, but I was wrong. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd tell anyone. And if, for just a second, any of this sounds familiar, I only ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me keep unburdening my soul. My name is Carol Hope Miller, I'm 68 years old, and until 3 months ago, I lived in an adobe house on the outskirts of San Antonio, in a little neighborhood off the old Mission Road. A house I helped build, brick by brick, with these same hands that now tremble as I write my story. The Talavera tile floor I picked out at the market in the Pearl District, the earth-toned walls I painted while pregnant with my second child, the garden where I planted purple bougainvillea that now covers the entire fence. All of that was my home. Or so I thought. That February morning, like every morning for the last 43 years, I woke up at 5:30 to make coffee on the stovetop I inherited from my mother-in-law, brewed with cinnamon and dark cane sugar. The aroma filled the kitchen as I prepared breakfast: refried beans, scrambled eggs with serrano peppers, and fresh tortillas warmed on the griddle. My husband, Stephen, would sit at the table, his navy blue work shirt already ironed, reading the San Antonio Express News with the kind of focus he only reserved for the stock market pages and financial news. For decades, that routine had given me peace. It was my way of showing love, of keeping our family together. But that morning, something in the air felt heavy, like the quiet before a thunderstorm. Stephen checked his phone more often than usual, his fingers drumming nervously on the wooden table. When I asked if he wanted more coffee, he just mumbled something without looking up. "Is everything all right, honey?" I asked, using that gentle tone I'd perfected over so many years of marriage. "Yeah, Carol. Just, have to leave early today. Work stuff." Stephen worked as an accountant for a construction company downtown. For all these years, he'd managed our finances with the meticulousness of someone who respects every single dollar. "Money doesn't grow on trees, Carol," he'd say whenever I suggested any extra expense. "We have to be careful, plan for the future." And I believed him. I always believed him. That morning, after he left, I started my daily routine, washing the dishes in the sink Stephen had promised to replace 5 years ago, hanging laundry in the backyard where the Texas sun dries everything in an hour, sweeping the dry leaves from the entryway. But something caught my eye. From the kitchen window, I saw Stephen walking toward the path that leads to the Guadalupe River, not toward the bus stop where he always caught his ride to work. He was carrying something. A metal box. Gray. Heavy, from the way he held it. And he was looking around like someone who didn't want to be seen. My heart started to pound. In 43 years of marriage, Stephen had never walked to the river in the morning. He'd never carried mysterious boxes. He'd never lied about going to work. Without thinking, I took off the floral apron I wore for my morning chores, slipped on my worn brown leather Huaraches, the only comfortable shoes I had left after so many years of scrimping, and followed him. I kept my distance, walking between the mesquite trees and prickly pear cacti that grow wild in that area. The dirt path was dry from the lack of rain, and my steps kicked up little clouds of dust that clung to my feet. From a small hill, I saw him clearly. Stephen stopped at the riverbank, looked around one last time to make sure he was alone, and with a quick, decisive motion, he threw the box into the water. The sound of the metal hitting the surface was an echo that seared itself into my soul. He stood there for a few minutes, watching the current carry away whatever was inside that box. His face showed no sadness, no relief. Just satisfaction. Like someone who had just gotten rid of a problem. When he was gone, I ran down to the bank. The Guadalupe isn't very deep during the dry season, and the box had gotten tangled in some willow branches hanging over the water. With my dress soaked to my knees and my heart beating like a mariachi drum, I managed to pull it out. It was heavy. Very heavy. And it had a padlock that, luckily, the water had rusted just enough for me to break with a rock. I walked back home, carrying that box as if it were a cursed treasure. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to unlock my own front door. I sat down at the kitchen table, where we'd had breakfast that same morning, where we'd celebrated birthdays and Christmases, where we'd made important decisions for decades. When I finally opened the box, my world collapsed. Inside were documents protected in plastic sleeves. Bank statements. Investment contracts. Property deeds. And all the dates went back 15 years. 15 years of lies. 15 years of secret accounts. 15 years of a parallel life my husband had built while I was counting pennies to buy the cheapest tomatoes at the farmer's market. $250,000. That was the amount on the most recent statements. A fortune that would have changed our lives, that would have paid for the surgeries my mother needed before she died, that would have sent our children to better colleges, that would have repaired this house that's been falling apart for years. And I I had been mending my own clothes for a decade, buying generic drugs instead of the ones the doctor prescribed, denying myself small pleasures like a coffee downtown or a new shawl for the 4th of July. As I read each document, each investment, each property I never knew existed, tears fell onto the papers like a summer rain. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, of humiliation, of a betrayal so deep it ached in my bones. In that moment, sitting in my kitchen with those documents spread across the table, I understood that the last 15 years of my life had been a lie. And that the man with whom I had shared a bed, a table, and my dreams for 4 decades, was a complete stranger. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed up until dawn, reviewing every paper, every date, every signature. And with every document I read, memories hit me like punches to the gut. 2008, the first statement was dated March 2008. I remembered that month perfectly because it was when my mother got sick with diabetes and needed expensive medicine that Medicaid wouldn't cover. I asked Stephen if we could help her, even with $100 a month. "Carol, we can't afford luxuries," he told me, sitting at the very same table where I now discovered his treachery. "We're barely making ends meet. Your mother needs to ask your brothers." But my brothers were worse off than we were. So I started selling tamales on weekends at the flea market by the old mission. I'd wake up at 4 in the morning to prepare the masa, fill the corn husks, and steam them in the giant pot my dear friend Hope lent me. My hands were covered in blisters from the hot steam, my back bent from leaning over the stove. Every dollar I earned, I gave directly to my mother for her medicine. Stephen never asked where the money came from. He just accepted it, as if it were my maternal duty to solve problems without involving our finances. And now I discovered that while I was killing myself selling tamales, he had tens of thousands of dollars stashed away in accounts I never knew existed. 2010, my daughter Lucy's gallbladder surgery. She needed $5,000 for a private procedure because the waitlist at the county clinic was 8 months long, and she was doubled over in pain every night. I begged Stephen. "We don't have that kind of money, Carol. She'll have to wait her turn like everyone else. But a mother can't watch her child suffer." I pawned my gold wedding earrings, the only real jewelry I had left. I sold my sewing machine, the one I'd used to make clothes for my children for years. I borrowed money from half the neighborhood, promising to pay it back with the tamales I was still selling. The surgery was a success, but it took me 2 years to pay off all the debts. 2 years of eating mostly beans and tortillas so I could make the payments. 2 years in which Stephen never asked how I'd gotten the money, never offered to help with the debts, never acknowledged my sacrifice. In the box, I found papers showing that in 2010, he had made his first major investment, $50,000 in a mutual fund that had grown to be worth over $100,000. 2012, the birth of my first grandson, Sebastian. My son Julian and his wife Sandra were desperate because the baby was born premature and needed special care. They couldn't afford daycare when Sandra had to go back to work. "I can watch him," I told Stephen. "But we'd have to fix up the back room, buy a crib, diapers, formula. That's not our responsibility, Carol. They chose to have kids, they can figure it out." But I couldn't see my grandson go without the care he needed. I went back to my routine of waking up at dawn, this time to make quesadillas to sell at the entrance of the textile mill where Sandra worked. With that money, I bought the crib, the diapers, everything my grandson needed. And for 3 years, while I cared for Sebastian from 5 in the morning until 8 at night, I also kept the house, cooked for Stephen, did the laundry, ironed, and continued selling quesadillas for extra expenses. The documents showed that in 2012, Stephen had bought a plot of land on South Padre Island. A piece of land now worth over $200,000. A piece of land I never knew about. 2015, my son Robert's accident. A car hit his motorcycle on his way home from work, and he couldn't use his right arm for 3 months. 3 months with no paycheck, with a pregnant wife and a 2-year-old baby. "Dad, I just need to borrow $3,000, Robert begged Stephen. "I'll pay you back as soon as I can work again." "Son, if I had it, I'd give it to you. But things are really tight." That same night, I heard Robert crying on the phone with his wife, crying like he did when he was a little boy and hurt himself playing football in the street. My mother's heart couldn't take it. The next day, I went to the bank and took out a personal loan for $3,000. I put up this house as collateral, the house that had been my parents', where I grew up, where I thought I would die. The interest rates were sky high, but I didn't care. I gave the money to Robert, telling him it was from our family savings. He hugged me, crying, and said, "Mom, you're an angel. I don't know what we'd do without you." It took me 5 years to pay off that loan. 5 years in which every month I handed over $400 that came from my food sales, from cleaning jobs I took in the gated community up on the hill, from any extra dollar I could scrape together. Stephen never asked why I was leaving so early to work outside the home. He never questioned where those monthly payments came from. He just came home and expected his dinner to be ready, his clothes to be clean, his bed to be made. In 2015, according to the documents, he had invested in mining stocks that had earned him over $30,000 in profits. But the most painful betrayal was in the last set of papers. A life insurance policy for $500,000, with me as the beneficiary. But there was a recent date, January 2024. The policy had been updated, and the beneficiary had been changed. Now, the beneficiary was his secretary, a 35-year-old woman named Patricia Hernandez. He hadn't just hidden money from me for 15 years. He had also planned to leave me with nothing when he died. While I was killing myself working to keep our family afloat, he was building a future with another woman. The kitchen clock read 4 in the morning when I finished the last document. Outside, the neighbors' roosters were already starting to crow, announcing a new day. But for me, life as I knew it was over. I got up from the table, my legs numb from sitting for so long. I walked to the bathroom mirror and saw myself. My gray hair was a mess, my eyes were swollen from crying, the wrinkles on my face deepened by sorrow. I looked old, tired, used up. But for the first time in years, I also saw something different in my eyes. A spark of rage that had been dormant for decades. A dignity I had forgotten I possessed. I put all the documents in a plastic bag and hid them under my mattress. When Stephen came home from work, we were going to have a conversation that would change everything. Because I was no longer the Carol who swallowed humiliations in silence. I was no longer the woman who accepted crumbs while her husband feasted in secret. I was a woman who had just discovered she'd been the useful fool for 15 years. And useful fools, when they wake up, can become the worst nightmares of those who underestimated them. Stephen came home that night as if nothing had happened. I heard him open the door with his key, hang his jacket on the coat rack in the hall, and walk toward the kitchen, expecting to find his dinner served, just like every day for the past 43 years. But I wasn't in the kitchen. I was sitting in the living room, on the second-hand armchair we bought when we first got married, with the documents spread out on the coffee table like cards in a macabre game. "Carol," he called from the kitchen. "Where's dinner?" "I'm in here, Stephen. Come to the living room." His tone changed immediately. After so many years together, he knew how to recognize when something was wrong. His footsteps became slower, more cautious, like an animal sensing danger. When he walked into the living room and saw the papers, all the color drained from his face. He just stood there, his blue shirt wrinkled from the day, staring at the documents as if they were venomous snakes. "What is this?" he asked, but his voice sounded different. Nervous. Guilty. "You tell me, Stephen. You're the one who's so good with numbers. What is this?" I picked up the first bank statement and held it out to him. $250,000 in an account bearing his name and that of Patricia Hernandez. His secretary. His mistress. His new beneficiary. "Where did you get this?" His voice now had an aggressive edge, as if I were the one who had done something wrong. "From the box you threw in the river this morning." "Yes, Stephen. I saw you. I followed you. And I found everything." For a moment, I thought he would deny it all. That he would invent some explanation, as he had for 15 years. But instead, he sank into the armchair opposite me and fell silent, staring at his hands. "Since when?" I asked. "Since when what? Don't play dumb with me, Stephen. Since when have you had this money? Since when have you been lying to me? Since when have you been making a fool out of me?" He sighed deeply, as if he'd been carrying a great weight and could finally let it go. "Since I opened the first account. 2008, 15 years. 15 years of lies. 15 years in which I denied myself the smallest pleasures while he built a fortune behind my back. And Patricia? 3 years. 3 years of having an affair with his secretary. 3 years of coming home, kissing me on the cheek, sharing a bed with me, all while he had another life with another woman. Why, Stephen? Why would you do this to me?" What happened next broke my soul more than all the documents combined. Because instead of apologizing, instead of showing even a shred of remorse, Stephen looked me straight in the eye and said, "Because you're not the woman I fell in love with anymore." His words hit me like a slap. I was left breathless, speechless, unable to understand how the man who had promised to love me until death did us part could be so cruel. "What do you mean by that?" "Look at yourself, Carol. Just look at yourself. You're 68 years old, you're overweight, wrinkled, you don't take care of yourself anymore. You walk like an old woman, you talk like an old woman, you think like an old woman. Patricia is young, beautiful, smart. She makes me feel alive again." Every word was a knife twisting in my chest. I couldn't believe this was the same man who had promised me eternal love, who had cried when our children were born, who had held me when my parents died. And what about everything we built together? Our children? Our family? "The kids are grown, Carol. They don't need us anymore." And this, he made a dismissive gesture, pointing around the house. This isn't building anything. This is surviving. I want to live, not just exist. Live on money that belonged to both of us? Live on money that could have helped our children when they needed it. That money is mine, Carol. I earned it, I saved it, I invested it. You never understood finances. You've always been basic. Basic. That word burned itself into my brain like a branding iron. Basic. As if all my sacrifices, all my love, all my dedication for 43 years were basic. Basic? Was I basic for selling tamales to help my mother? Basic for working day and night so our children had what they needed? Basic for taking care of this house, for taking care of you, for being faithful my entire life? That's just what wives do, Carol. You don't get a medal for doing your duty. In that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't dramatic, I didn't scream or throw things. It just snapped, like an old rubber band stretched too thin, breaking without a sound. I got up from the armchair and went to the kitchen. I opened the drawer where I kept important papers and pulled out our marriage certificate. I placed it on the coffee table next to the bank statements. You see this, Stephen? This says we were married in the state of Texas. Do you know what that means? For the first time in the entire conversation, I saw fear in his eyes. It means we live in a community property state. It means half of all of this is mine. Legally mine. It doesn't matter what account it's in, it doesn't matter whose name is on it. Half of it is mine. Carol, don't be ridiculous. You don't understand how these things work, you're right. I don't. That's why tomorrow, I'm going to see a lawyer who can explain my exact rights as your legal wife. He shot to his feet so fast he almost knocked over the table. You can't do that. Why not? Because I'm too basic? Because I'm old and wrinkled? Because I'm not worth anything to you anymore? Carol, calm down. We can talk about this like adults. No, Stephen. There's nothing left to talk about. For 15 years, I talked to you about our money problems. I begged you to help with the family's expenses. I asked you to be a team. And you lied to me every single day, in every conversation, every time you told me we didn't have money. I started gathering the documents from the table. My hands were trembling, but my voice was steady. While I was counting pennies for medicine, you had a fortune. While I was selling food on the street to help our children, you were investing in stocks. While I was pawning my jewelry to pay for family emergencies, you were buying land with your mistress. Where are you going with those papers? To make copies. First thing tomorrow, I'm seeing a lawyer. And after that, I'm going to talk to our children and tell them who their father really is. Carol, wait. Don't do something you're going to regret. I stopped at the living room doorway and looked at him one last time. This graying man, with his protruding belly, with bitter lines etched around his eyes, who had decided I was no longer worth the effort. The only thing I regret, Stephen, is wasting 43 years of my life on a man who never valued me. But that ends tonight. I went up to our room and locked the door. For the first time in decades, I was going to sleep alone. And for the first time in years, I felt at peace with myself. Because I had finally understood that it wasn't me who was worthless. It was him who had never understood my worth. The next morning, Stephen was gone when I came down to the kitchen. His side of the bed hadn't been slept in, and a suitcase was missing from the closet. He had run away, like the coward he always was when things got tough. But I had a mission. After a simple breakfast of black coffee and toast, I no longer had the desire to make the elaborate meals I'd prepared for decades. I dialed my eldest son's number. Julian? It's your mom. I need to see you today. It's important. What happened, Mom? Are you okay? I'm fine, but I need to talk to you and your siblings about your father. Can you all come to the house at 2 this afternoon? There was a pause. Julian had always been the most protective of Stephen, the one who most resembled him in his calculated way of looking at life. Is it something serious? Very serious, honey. Just please, be here. At 2 o'clock sharp, my 3 children were sitting in the living room. Julian in his business suit, Lucy always so put together in her silk blouse, and Robert in his work shirt, his hands stained with grease because he'd come straight from his job at the auto shop. I looked at the 3 of them and saw my own eyes reflected back at me. My sacrifices made flesh. The sleepless nights when they had fevers. The extra jobs to buy them school uniforms. The times I went without so they could have enough. Where's Dad? Lucy asked, looking toward the kitchen as if expecting him to appear with coffee and cookies. Your father left. Last night. I don't know where he is. The 3 of them exchanged worried glances. Robert was the first to speak. Did you two have a fight? Mom, you guys never fight. If only he knew that we never fought because I always gave in, always kept quiet, always accepted whatever Stephen decided. We didn't fight, Robert. I discovered something your father has been hiding from me for 15 years. I placed the documents on the coffee table, just as I had the night before. But this time, my heart was beating differently. Not with fear, but with the determination of someone who was finally going to tell the whole truth. Your father has secret bank accounts. Investments I knew nothing about. Properties he bought without telling me. For 15 years, while I was killing myself working to help all of you, he had hundreds of thousands of dollars saved up. Julian picked up the first document and started to read. His eyes darted from left to right, processing the numbers with the same skill he'd inherited from his father. Mom, this can't be real. Why not? Because your father is incapable of lying? Because he's a saint who would never hurt his family. Lucy leaned over Julian's shoulder to see the papers. Her face paled as she read. 250,000. Mom, this is a lot of money. It's enough money to have paid for your surgery, Lucy, without me having to pawn my earrings. It's enough to have helped Robert when he had his accident without me having to take out a loan against the house. It's enough to have sent Sebastian to that private school you wanted for him. Robert took another document and studied it with the focus he applied to broken engines. Mom, it says here Dad bought land on South Padre Island in 2012. Did you know about this? I didn't know anything, Robert. Nothing at all. For 15 years, I lived thinking we were poor, that we had to watch every penny, that we couldn't afford to help when you needed it. I expected my children to react with outrage. I expected them to feel betrayed, deceived, used. I expected them to understand that their mother had been the victim of an enormous lie for half of her marriage. But Julian's reaction broke my heart more than anything Stephen had ever done. Mom, maybe Dad had his reasons for not telling you. What reasons, Julian? Well, you were never very good with money. I remember you were always spending it on unnecessary things, helping people who didn't deserve it. Unnecessary things? Like your grandmother's medicine? Like your sister's surgery? Like helping you all when you were in trouble? Lucy intervened with that soft voice she used when she wanted to manipulate a situation. Mom, don't be like that. I'm sure Dad was saving for our future, for when you two got older, for our future. Lucy, your father changed the beneficiary on his life insurance policy. It's not me anymore. It's his secretary, a woman he's been having an affair with for 3 years. The silence that followed was different. This time, it wasn't surprise, it was discomfort. As if I'd said something I shouldn't have. Did you know? I asked, my stomach churning. None of them would meet my eyes. Robert stared at his greasy hands. Lucy started fussing with papers that didn't need arranging. Julian cleared his throat, just like he did as a boy when he'd done something wrong. Mom, did you know your father had a mistress? We didn't know. Well, we suspected, Lucy mumbled. You suspected? Since when? Since last year, Julian admitted. Dad told us you two weren't getting along, that you were going through a rough patch in your marriage, and not one of you thought to talk to me? To ask me how I was feeling? To support your mother? Robert finally looked up. Mom, we didn't want to get involved in your marital problems. Dad told us not to say anything because he didn't want to hurt you. There it was. The truth that shattered my soul into a million pieces. My own children had chosen to protect their father's lies over protecting their mother. They had known for a year that Stephen was cheating on me and had decided to remain silent. And the money? Did you know about the money too? The way they avoided my gaze gave me the answer before they spoke. Dad told us he'd made some investments, Julian confessed. That it was for family emergencies. Family emergencies? When Robert had his accident, where was this emergency fund? When Lucy needed the down payment for her house, where was it? When your grandmother was dying and needed medicine, where was this emergency family fund? Mom, calm down, Lucy said, her condescending tone wounding me more than any shout. You're blowing things out of proportion. Dad has always been very responsible with money. Responsible? Is lying to your wife for 15 years being responsible? Maybe you two just need to talk, work things out like adults, Robert suggested. In that moment, I understood something terrible. My children didn't see me as a person with a right to feel betrayed and hurt. They saw me as an obstacle between them and the financial stability their father represented. Do you know what hurts the most? I said, beginning to gather the documents from the table. It's not that your father lied to me. It's not that he was unfaithful. It's that you, my own children, the babies I raised, fed, and cared for when you were sick, the people I protected my whole life, you chose to take his side before you even heard mine. Mom, it's not that we're on his side, Julian began. Yes, you are. The moment you decided to keep quiet about his mistress, you took his side. The moment you justified his lies about the money, you chose to protect him instead of me. I stood up, clutching the documents to my chest like a shield. Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to a lawyer. I'm going to claim what is legally mine from that money. And then I'm going to build my own life, without depending on a man who sees me as an inconvenience or on children who prefer financial comfort to defending their mother. Mom, don't be so dramatic, Lucy said. We can all work this out as a family. Family? A family protects each other. A family doesn't keep hurtful secrets. A family doesn't choose sides when one of its members is being betrayed. I walked to the living room door but stopped before leaving. For 30 years, you were my priority. Everything I did was for you, because of you, thinking of you. But now I understand that to you, I'm just the woman who cooks, who cleans, who solves problems without asking questions. Well, that's over. I left the house, closing the door softly behind me. I didn't slam it because I was no longer angry. I just felt a profound sadness and a terrible clarity. I was utterly alone in the world. That same afternoon, I walked through downtown San Antonio, the documents tucked into a tote bag I'd used for grocery shopping for years. I passed by the cathedral where I had prayed so many times for my family's happiness, never knowing that the happiness I prayed for was a lie built on my ignorance. Ms. Ramirez's office was in an old building near the courthouse. I'd found her online, searching for family law attorneys. Her receptionist, an older woman with thick glasses, greeted me kindly when I explained I needed advice on divorce and marital assets. Ms. Ramirez can see you now, she said. She's very good. She's been defending women in cases like yours for 30 years. I waited in a small room with plastic chairs and old magazines. My hands were sweating as I clutched the bag with the documents. It was the first time in my life I had made such a big decision without consulting anyone, without asking for permission, without seeking approval. Carmen Ramirez turned out to be a woman my age, with a full head of gray hair and eyes that had seen many stories like mine. When I showed her the documents, she wasn't surprised. She just nodded with the wisdom of someone who had seen this movie too many times. Mrs. Miller, legally, you are entitled to half of all these assets, she explained after reviewing every paper. Texas is a community property state, which means everything acquired during the marriage belongs to both spouses, regardless of who earned it or whose name it's in. But he says it's his money because he earned it. That doesn't matter, ma'am. The law is clear. Furthermore, the fact that he concealed these assets for 15 years constitutes fraudulent administration of community assets. This entitles you not only to your half, but also to compensation for emotional distress. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope. It wasn't just the money, though I desperately needed financial security, it was the legal recognition that I had rights, that my pain was valid, that I wasn't crazy for feeling betrayed. What do I need to do? First, we'll freeze all the accounts so he can't move any more money. Then we'll file for divorce and begin the division of assets. We can also sue for emotional distress and concealment of assets. That night, I returned to a house that felt different. It was no longer our house. It was the house where I had discovered my marriage was a lie, where I had understood that my children saw me as a useful piece of furniture, and where I had decided I would no longer be anyone's victim. I made a simple dinner for myself, a fried egg with refried beans and tortillas warmed on the griddle. I ate in silence, without the background noise of Stephen shuffling his papers or talking on the phone about work. For the first time in decades, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full of possibilities. The next day, Ms. Ramirez had kept her word. I got a call early in the morning. Mrs. Miller, the accounts are now frozen. Your husband cannot move a single dollar without a court order. We have also initiated the process for a temporary restraining order on the South Padre Island property. That same morning, Stephen showed up at the front door. He looked disheveled, wearing the same clothes from the day before, with a 3-day-old beard that made him look like a defeated man. Carol, we need to talk. We have nothing to talk about, Stephen. Anything we have to say to each other can be said through our lawyers. You can't do this to me. That money is my life's work. And this house is my life's work. This family is my life's work. My sacrifices are my life's work. Or does only the work that gets paid in dollars count? He stood on the porch because I wouldn't let him in. It was strange to have the power to deny him access to what had been his home for decades. The kids told me you spoke with them yesterday. Yes. I told them the truth. Something you never did. Carol, they're worried about you. They say you're acting strange, that you're not yourself. You're right. I'm not myself. The Carol who was your wife died yesterday when I found out who you really are. This Carol no longer accepts lies or humiliation. Look, we can work this out. I can give you a monthly amount, like alimony. Alimony? As if I were your employee retiring after 40 years of service? That's not what I meant, it's exactly what you meant, Stephen. For our entire marriage, you've seen me as your housekeeper. Someone who cooks, cleans, raises the children, and meets your needs without expecting anything in return but a roof over her head and food on the table. Carol, I love you. No, Stephen. You love Patricia. You had me. There's a big difference between loving and having. I closed the door, gently but firmly. I heard him stand outside for several minutes, probably expecting me to change my mind, to open the door crying and beg him to come back. But I was busy doing something I hadn't done in years, thinking about myself. That afternoon, I went to the bank where we had kept our joint savings account for decades. The account that always showed modest balances, the one I used to pay for household expenses while Stephen managed the important finances in accounts I didn't know existed. I'd like to close this account, I told the young bank teller, who treated me with the professional courtesy reserved for long-time customers. Are you sure, Mrs. Miller? You've had this account since 1985, very sure. I withdrew the $800 left in the account and opened a new one, this time in my name only. It was a small amount compared to the fortune Stephen had hidden, but it was mine. All mine. Then I went to the grocery store and, for the first time in years, bought things I wanted instead of just what I needed. I bought aged cheddar instead of the cheap block cheese I always bought. I bought gourmet coffee instead of the instant coffee we drank to save money. I bought flowers for the table just because I liked them, not because it was a special occasion. That night, as I ate my fancy cheese quesadilla and drank my gourmet coffee, my phone rang. It was Julian. Mom, we need to talk. Dad came over to my house, he's really upset. He says you froze his accounts. I froze our accounts, Julian. The accounts that legally belong to both of us. Mom, this is getting out of hand. Can't you just talk to Dad and work things out like adults? Like adults? Julian, your father lied to me for 15 years. He cheated on me for 3 years. He hid hundreds of thousands of dollars while I was killing myself working to help this family. Is that acting like an adult? But Mom, if you take him to court, everything will come out. People will find out. It'll be embarrassing for the whole family. There it was again. The concern for appearances, for what people would say, for maintaining the facade of a perfect family even if it was rotten on the inside. You know what's embarrassing, Julian? What's embarrassing is that your mother was treated like a fool for 15 years. What's embarrassing is that you all knew about your father's betrayal and let me live in a lie. What's embarrassing is that you're more worried about the family's reputation than your mother's dignity. Mom, don't be so dramatic. I'm not being dramatic, son. I'm a woman who has finally decided to respect herself. And if that bothers you, that's your problem, not mine. I hung up the phone and turned it off. For the first time in decades, I was not going to be available to solve other people's problems, to soothe other people's worries, to sacrifice my well-being for the comfort of others. I poured myself another cup of gourmet coffee and went out to the patio to look at the stars. The night was clear, the air was cool, and I felt a lightness I had forgotten was possible. I didn't have a husband. My children were angry with me. I didn't know what would happen with the money or the house or my future. But for the first time in 43 years, I was completely free to decide my own life. And that freedom, as scary as it was, also felt beautiful. 3 weeks later, just as I was getting used to waking up without the pressure of making breakfast for someone else, my doorbell rang on a Saturday morning. I opened the door to find my entire family standing on the step, Stephen, Julian, Lucy, Robert, and even their spouses and my grandchildren. Carol, we need to talk, Stephen said, using that authoritative voice that had worked on me for 4 decades. This has gone too far. Did you bring the grandkids for emotional blackmail? I asked, looking at the confused little faces of Sebastian and Sophia, who clearly didn't understand why they were there. We brought the whole family because this affects the whole family, Julian replied. Mom, you have to understand that your decisions don't just affect you. You have grandkids who have a future to think about, children who have responsibilities. I let them in, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't want the neighbors to witness what was about to happen. They sat down in the living room as if it were an intervention, as if I were the sick one who needed to be cured of her madness. All right, explain it to me, I said, remaining standing while they took up all the seats. What exactly did I do wrong? Stephen cleared his throat, preparing for the speech he had surely rehearsed. Carol, I understand you feel hurt. I understand you think I hid things from you. But what I did was think about our family's future. That money was there for emergencies, for when we really needed it. Like when we needed to pay for Lucy's surgery? Like when Robert had his accident? Like when my mother was dying? Were those not real emergencies? Those situations were resolved in other ways. They were resolved because I worked myself to the bone to resolve them. Because I sold my jewelry, because I took out loans, because I worked day and night selling food on the street. Lucy chimed in with that sweet voice she used when she wanted something. Mom, but that's in the past. The important thing is that now we know there's money for everyone. We can plan for the future, secure the grandkids' education, secure the grandkids' education? Lucy, when Sebastian needed money for his tutoring last year, where was his grandfather? When Sophia wanted to take dance lessons, who told her it was too expensive? Mom, don't hold grudges, Robert said. Dad made mistakes, but we all make mistakes. The important thing is to forgive and move on as a family. I looked at Robert, my youngest, the one who had cried in my arms when he had no money after his accident, and I felt a mixture of sadness and rage that choked me. Mistakes, Robert? Lying to me for 15 years is a mistake? Having a mistress for 3 years is a mistake? Changing the beneficiary on his life insurance policy to leave me with nothing when he died is a mistake. The grandkids looked at the adults, not understanding a thing but sensing the tension that filled the room like toxic smoke. About that, Stephen coughed uncomfortably. I already changed the beneficiary back. You're the beneficiary again. After my lawyer discovered it in the legal filings? How generous of you, Stephen. Carol, you're being very unfair, chimed in Sandra, Julian's wife. Stephen has always been a good provider, a good father. Sandra, you be quiet. You know nothing about my marriage. You didn't live through the humiliations, the lies, the years of feeling like a servant in my own home. Mom, don't talk to Sandra like that. Julian jumped in. She's just trying to help. Help? Help convince me to go back to living like a fool so you can all continue to benefit from your father's money? The silence that followed was tense, uncomfortable. I had said out loud what they all knew but no one wanted to admit. It's not about the money, Lucy murmured, but her voice was unconvincing. Of course it's about the money. I exploded. Do you think I'm an idiot? For a year, you knew your father was cheating on me and you said nothing. You knew about the hidden money and said nothing. But as soon as I freeze the accounts, suddenly everyone wants a family meeting to talk. Stephen stood up, probably thinking his physical presence would intimidate me as it had for so many years. Carol, that's enough. You're acting like a spoiled child. Accept reality, we're a family, we have problems like all families, but we solve them by talking, not by destroying everything we've built. Destroying? Stephen, you destroyed this marriage when you decided to lie to me for 15 years. You destroyed this family when you decided I didn't deserve to know the truth about our finances. You destroyed my trust when you decided a 35-year-old woman was better company than the mother of your children. That's over. I'm done with Patricia Hernandez. I don't work with her anymore. I don't see her anymore. Is that because you got caught, or because you're actually sorry? He couldn't answer. His silence was all the answer I needed. Look, I said, walking to the window where I could see the garden I had tended for decades. I'm going to explain something you all apparently don't understand. For 43 years, I was the perfect wife by your standards. I cooked, I cleaned, I raised children, I solved problems without complaining, I accepted humiliation without protest, I worked to help the family without expecting recognition. I turned to face them all. But that woman doesn't exist anymore. That woman died the day I found the box in the river. What's left is me, Carol Hope Miller, a 68-year-old woman who has finally decided she deserves respect, honesty, and dignity. Mom, Robert began. No, let me finish. The divorce is moving forward. The division of assets is moving forward. I am not getting back together with a man who sees me as an obstacle to his happiness. I am not going to keep pretending we're a happy family when in reality, I was the only one who didn't know we were living a lie. So what about us? Lucy asked, tears in her eyes. Are we not your children anymore? You will always be my children. I love you, and that will never change. But I also respect myself too much to continue allowing you to treat me the way you have. We're not treating you badly, Julian mumbled. Julian, 3 weeks ago, you told me not to be dramatic when I told you your father had lied to me for 15 years. Lucy, you told me your father surely had his reasons for hiding the money. Robert, you told me to forgive and move on as if nothing happened. Is that not treating me badly? I picked up the family photo album from the coffee table. Pictures of birthdays, Christmases, graduations, weddings. 40 years of memories that now look different in the light of the truth. Do you know what I'm going to do with these photos? I said, hugging the album to my chest. I'm going to put them in an icebox. Because they represent real moments of love, even if that love wasn't returned in the way I thought. I walked from the living room to the front hall. But I'm not going to live clinging to the past. I'm not going to sacrifice my present to maintain an illusion of a perfect family that only ever existed in my head. I opened the front door and stood beside it, in a position that left no doubt about what I expected them to do. I love you all. I will always love you. But I will no longer allow that love to make me a victim of your selfish decisions. One by one, they left. The grandchildren gave me confused hugs. My daughters-in-law kissed my cheek awkwardly. My children left in silence, not knowing what to say. Stephen was the last to leave. He stopped in front of me and looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. Carol, it doesn't have to end like this. You're right, Stephen. It should have ended 15 years ago, the first time you decided to lie to me. I closed the door softly and leaned against it for several minutes, listening to the silence of my empty house. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely alone. And for the first time in my adult life, that loneliness felt like freedom. 6 months after that family meeting, my life was unrecognizable. Ms. Ramirez had done an excellent job. The judge divided the assets exactly in half, and also awarded me an additional $50,000 in damages for the concealment of assets. With my share of the money, I had enough to buy a small condo in the King William Historic District and live comfortably for the rest of my days. But the most important thing wasn't the money. It was who I had become in the process. My new home was a small second-floor apartment in a soft pink building, with a terrace full of pots where I grew herbs and flowers I chose simply because I liked their colors. From my window, I could see the arts and crafts market and hear the street musicians who played every afternoon in the main square. For the first time in my life, I had decorated a space based solely on my own taste. Mint green walls that reminded me of the ocean I'd never seen. Comfortable furniture I had picked out myself, without consulting anyone on whether it was practical or appropriate. Stacks of books everywhere, romance novels I'd stopped reading because Stephen said they were a waste of time. Every morning, I woke up when my body was rested, not when an alarm clock ordered me to. I had breakfast on my terrace watching the sunrise, drinking good coffee and eating a pastry from Rosa's bakery, where I had become the favorite customer. "Good morning, Carol," Rosa would greet me each morning when I came down for my pastry. "How is the freest woman in San Antonio today?" Because that's what had happened. I had become a free woman. And everyone in the neighborhood could see it in the way I walked, talked, and laughed. I had started taking painting classes at the Community Arts Center. Something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for between cooking, cleaning, working, and solving everyone else's problems. My first paintings were terrible, formless blobs of color, but they gave me a satisfaction I hadn't felt in decades. "Don't paint what you see, Carol," my teacher, Armando, a man my age who had been an artist his whole life, would tell me. "Paint what you feel." And so I painted my freedom. I painted the rage I had held in for years in intense shades of red. I painted my sadness for the lost time in deep blues. I painted my rebirth in brilliant yellows that seemed to burst from the canvas. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I volunteered at a shelter for abused women. I listened to stories that reminded me of my own, women who had lost their identity in all-consuming marriages, who had accepted emotional crumbs thinking it was love, who didn't know who they were outside of their roles as wives and mothers. I thought it was too late to change my life. Hope, a 50-year-old woman who had come to the shelter after 30 years of a toxic marriage, told me. I thought at my age, you couldn't start over. Hope, I'd answer, taking her hands in mine, I started my new life at 68. It's never too late to realize you deserve to be happy. My children called me occasionally. At first, the conversations were awkward, filled with silences and unspoken reproaches. Robert was the first to visit me in my new home. "Mom, this place is really nice," he said, looking at my terrace full of plants. "You look different." "Different how?" "I don't know, younger. More happy." Robert started visiting on Sundays. He would come alone, without his wife, and help me with small repairs around the apartment. It was our way of reconnecting without directly talking about what had happened. Lucy took longer to come around. One day, she showed up at my door, her eyes red from crying. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she said before I could even invite her in. "You were right. We didn't defend you when we should have. I thought that if Dad was happy, the whole family would be happy. I didn't understand that your happiness mattered, too." We cried together that afternoon. We cried for the lost years, for the words left unsaid, for the pain that had collected between us like dust in the corners. Julian was the most difficult. His pride was just like his father's, and admitting he was wrong was harder for him than for his siblings. But finally, the day came when he also knocked on my door. "Mom, my marriage is in trouble," he confessed during that first visit. "Sandra says I'm just like Dad, that I treat her like she's invisible. And I think she's right. And what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know." "How do you learn to treat people right when you never saw a good example at home?" "By asking, Julian. Just like you're doing now. Admitting there's a problem is the first step to fixing it." We started having regular conversations about relationships, about respect, about the difference between loving someone and taking their love for granted. It was strange being a marriage counselor to my own son, but it was also healing for both of us. My grandkids started visiting more often. Sebastian, who was already 15, told me something that stayed in my heart. "Grandma, my parents said you were really brave to divorce Grandpa. What do you think?" "I think everyone deserves to be happy. And you didn't seem happy before. You do now." Stephen had tried to reconcile with me twice. The first time was 3 months after the divorce, when he showed up at my new place with flowers and a rehearsed speech about second chances. "Carol, I've done a lot of thinking. I think we can try again. I've changed." "Stephen, you haven't changed. You're just afraid of being alone and you ran out of money to impress younger women." The second time was 6 months later, when he heard from the grandkids that I was taking painting classes and volunteering. "You look good, Carol. You look happy." "I am happy, Stephen." Do you think we could be friends? We had a lot of years together. We had good times, too. I looked into his eyes and saw an old, tired man who was beginning to understand what he had lost. I didn't feel rage or satisfaction at his late-stage regret. I just felt nothing. Stephen, I wish you the best. I really do. But I don't need your friendship to be happy. And I think it's better for both of us if we each live our own lives. One afternoon, while I was painting on my terrace, watching the sunset over the historic rooftops of the King William district, I realized something surprising. I hadn't thought about Stephen in weeks. Not with anger, not with sadness, not with anything. I simply hadn't thought of him. For 43 years, every decision I made had passed through the filter of, what will Stephen think? Will Stephen like this? Will this bother Stephen? And now, for the first time in my adult life, my decisions were entirely my own. What are you thinking about, Carol? Rosa asked me. She'd come up to my terrace with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. I'm thinking that it's never too late to get to know yourself, I replied. I'm 68 years old and I'm just now discovering what I like, what I want, who I am when I'm not someone's wife or someone's mother. And what have you discovered? That I like to sleep in on Sundays. That I love the color yellow. That I'm a good listener for other women. That I can live alone without feeling lonely. That silence isn't scary when it's a silence you choose. That night, before going to sleep, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. My hair was completely gray, but I wore it down instead of in the tight bun I'd had for decades. I had wrinkles, but they were the wrinkles of a woman who had started to smile genuinely. My eyes looked different, clearer, more awake, more alive. Hello, Carol, I said to my reflection. It's nice to finally meet you. And for the first time in my life, I liked the woman I saw in the mirror. A year after finding that box in the river, I'm sitting in the same place where it all began, the bank of the Guadalupe River. But this time, I'm not pulling secrets from the water. This time, I'm here by choice, enjoying the sunset with a thermos of coffee and my sketchbook. The water is still flowing, as always, carrying away dry leaves, broken branches, everything that has served its time. I like to think it also carried away the Carol I used to be, the woman who accepted crumbs of love, who settled for lies disguised as protection, who believed her worth depended on how useful she was to others. That Carol drowned in this river the day I found the truth. And from her ashes, this new woman was born, one who now watches the water without fear, without anger, without the desperate need to please anyone but herself. My phone rings. It's Lucy. Mom, are you busy? I have some news. Tell me, sweetie. Dad is getting married. To a woman he met on a dating app. She's 40 and works at a bank. We wanted you to hear it from us before you heard it from someone else. I wait to feel something. Pain, anger, jealousy, sadness. But the only thing I feel is a kind of quiet relief. And how do you feel about it? I ask her. It's weird. We haven't even met this woman, but Dad already announced they're getting married in 2 months. It's like he's running toward something without really knowing what it is. Your father has always needed someone to confirm his worth. I did that job for 43 years. Now it's someone else's turn. It doesn't bother you? Lucy, it bothered me when I thought our marriage was real. Now I understand that what I had with your father wasn't love, it was habit, convenience, a fear of loneliness. Real love doesn't need lies to survive. Mom, do you think you'll ever want to be with someone else? The question makes me smile. A few months ago, Robert introduced me to Michael, a 70-year-old widower who goes to the same painting class. He's a gentle man, with laugh lines around his eyes and an artist's hands that create beautiful landscapes. We've had coffee some afternoons, visited museums together, talked about books and about life. Maybe, sweetie. But if I ever decide to share my life with someone, it will be for companionship, not out of necessity. It will be because I choose to be with that person, not because I'm afraid of being alone. After hanging up, I walk along the path that takes me back home. I pass by the house where I lived for decades, which is now for sale because Stephen couldn't keep up with the payments on his own. It has a large "for sale" sign and the windows look empty, sad. I stop for a moment in front of the door where I entered as a newlywed, full of dreams about the perfect family we would build. Where I left as a divorced woman, carrying only a single suitcase but also carrying my reclaimed dignity. I don't feel nostalgic. That house was my prison for years, even if I didn't realize it. It was beautiful, comfortable, full of memories, but it was also built on lies. My new apartment is smaller, more modest, but every brick is built on truth. When I get to my building, Rosa is waiting for me with a mischievous smile. Carol, I've got some gossip. Did you know your ex-husband has been around asking about you? Really? Yes, ma'am. He asked Mr. Joaquin if you had a boyfriend, if you seemed happy, if you ever talked about him. Mr. Joaquin told him you were glowing and that he'd never heard you mention his name. I laugh, a real, genuine laugh. The idea of Stephen being concerned about my happiness after ignoring it for decades seems ironically funny. And you know what else? Rosa continues. I saw him at the market yesterday buying flowers. Expensive ones. I think he's planning on coming to see you. Well, he can come if he wants. I'm not the same woman who melts for flowers and pretty words anymore. That night, as I eat dinner on my terrace, listening to the music drifting up from the square, I reflect on everything that has changed. Not just in my external life, the new home, the money in the bank, the freedom of my schedule, but in my internal life. For 68 years, I lived believing that my value was determined by what others thought of me. That I was a good mother if my children were happy, a good wife if my husband was satisfied, a good woman if I didn't cause trouble or ask for too much. Now I understand that the only judgment that matters is my own. That I can be a good mother by loving my children but not allowing them to mistreat me. That I can be a good woman without sacrificing my dignity on the altar of family peace. My paintings have improved a lot. My teacher, Armando, says I have a natural talent that was dormant for decades. Last week I sold my first painting, a landscape of the King William District at sunset, to an American tourist who said the painting conveyed freedom and hope. Freedom and hope. Exactly what I feel every morning when I open my eyes in my own bed, in my room decorated to my taste, in my home where no one tells me how to live my life. The work at the shelter has taught me that my story is not unique. There are thousands of women living different versions of the same thing, marriages where they are invisible, families where they are taken for granted, lives where they have forgotten who they are beneath all the roles they play for others. Some ask me if I don't regret waiting so long to get a divorce. Mrs. Carroll, don't you feel sad about the lost years? Hope, I didn't lose those years. I lived them the only way I knew how at the time. I can't regret not knowing then what I know now. The important thing is that when the truth arrived, I had the courage to act on it. 2 weeks later, sure enough, Stephen appears at my door. He's carrying flowers, expensive red roses, and wearing the blue shirt I gave him for his birthday 3 years ago. Carol, can we talk? Of course, Stephen. But out here. You can't come into my house anymore. We sit on the benches in the small garden in front of my building. He looks nervous, older, more tired than the last time I saw him. I heard you're getting married, I say, cutting to the chase. Yes, well, maybe. I'm not sure yet. What do you need, Stephen? I need to know if you still feel anything for me. If there's any chance at all that we could try again. I look him straight in the eye, these eyes I once thought I knew, that I once loved without reservation. Stephen, I am no longer the woman who needs a man to give her life meaning. I am no longer the woman who accepts crumbs of attention and calls it love. I am no longer the woman who settles for being useful instead of being valued. But Carol, we had good times, yes, we did. And we also had lies, infidelity, disrespect, and years of you seeing me as a useful piece of furniture. The good doesn't erase the bad, Stephen. He sits in silence for several minutes, holding the flowers that are already starting to wilt. Are you happy? He finally asks. Happier than I've been in my entire adult life. Without me? Especially without me. I don't say it with cruelty. I say it with the peace of someone who has found her own truth. He leaves after that, leaving the flowers on the bench. I pick them up and give them to Rosa, who puts them in a vase at the building's reception desk. What do you want them for? I ask. Because they're pretty, Mrs. Carroll. And pretty things aren't to blame for who bought them or why. That night, I write something in my journal that I think sums up everything I've learned. Today I understood that I was never Stephen's victim. I was the victim of my own need to be needed. The day I stopped needing his approval to feel worthy, I became free. It's been 18 months since I found that box in the river. 18 months since my world collapsed and I had to build a new one from scratch. It has been the hardest and most beautiful period of my life. Because sometimes, to be reborn, you first have to let everything you thought you were die. And I was reborn. At 68, I discovered who I am when I'm not trying to be what others need me to be. Have you ever experienced something similar? Do you know someone who lost their identity in a marriage or a family that took them for granted? If so, I want you to know that it is never too late to choose your own happiness. If this story touched your heart, leave me a comment telling me about your experience. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, please share this. Sometimes, one story can be the spark that ignites the courage someone needs to change their life. Give this a like if you believe we all deserve to be valued, and subscribe so that more stories like this can reach the women who need to remember their worth.